Night had settled over the northern countryside when King Oswine of Deira sought refuge in the home of a man he believed he could trust. Only a short time earlier, he had stood at the head of an army. That army was now gone. Oswine had dismissed it after realizing that the opposing force was larger and that open battle would probably end in slaughter. He had neither surrendered his crown nor become an ordinary fugitive. He remained the living representative of Deira's royal line, a king whose name could summon warriors again. Yet that night, none of the protections of kingship surrounded him. Beside him remained only one loyal companion, a warrior named Tondhere. Hunwald's walls should have offered secrecy and the sacred protection of hospitality. Oswine regarded Hunwald as a friend and supporter. That confidence would cost him his life. Somewhere beyond the estate, armed men were already moving. They served Oswiu, king of Bernicia, Oswine's rival for control of Northumbria. Their leader was an official named Ethelwyn, and they did not approach to negotiate a peaceful division of power. Hunwald revealed the hiding place of the king he had promised to protect. The passage from dynastic rivalry to murder was opened from inside the house. The surviving account does not preserve Oswine's final words. The record does not tell us whether he immediately understood that his host had betrayed him, or whether he hoped that royal status, Christian conscience, or the shame of killing a defenseless ruler might still save him. The murder solved Oswiu's most immediate problem. His rival could never raise another army. Yet it created a danger that force alone could not remove. Oswine was widely loved, connected to the royal family of Deira, respected by important churchmen, and related to Oswiu's own queen. His end was remembered not as an honorable defeat in battle, but as an act of betrayal. The question left behind is therefore larger than the details of one assassination. Why did Oswiu decide that Oswine had to die after the danger of immediate battle had passed? Was the murder an act of personal hatred, a brutal but calculated attempt to prevent civil war, or the decisive step in a struggle to turn two rival kingdoms into one Northumbria? To understand that choice, we must enter a world in which England was not yet a single state. In the middle of the 7th century, the island was divided among kingdoms whose borders changed through marriage, conquest, rebellion, and the sudden death of rulers. Kings did not command permanent national governments. Their authority rested upon personal loyalty, inherited claims, control of land, military reputation, religious support, and the willingness of nobles to answer a summons. A king who appeared strong could attract followers. A king who seemed weak could lose them before the next season. Northern England was shaped by an especially unstable arrangement. The kingdom later called Northumbria had grown from two major regions, Bernicia in the north and Deira in the south. Bernicia was associated with the fortress of Bamberg, the island monastery of Lindisfarne, and a royal dynasty that had survived exile and repeated war. Deira included York, fertile lands, influential noble families, and its own ancient royal line. The two regions could be ruled together, but unity did not erase their separate memories. Deiran nobles kept the memory of their own kings alive. Bernician warriors followed Bernician rulers. When one dynasty controlled both regions, the arrangement might resemble a united kingdom. When rival heirs appeared, the old division returned. Oswiu himself embodied this complicated inheritance. His father, Ethelfrith, had been a powerful Bernician king who extended his authority into Deira. His mother, Acha, belonged to the Deiran royal house. Oswiu was therefore Bernician by dynasty, but connected by blood to Deira. His later marriage to Eanfled, the daughter of the famous Deiran king Edwin, strengthened that connection. Yet blood ties did not guarantee acceptance. In early medieval politics, relatives were often the most dangerous rivals because their ancestry gave them believable claims. An invader might threaten from outside, but a cousin, nephew, or brother could convince local nobles that he embodied lawful rule. Royal genealogy was therefore more than ceremony. It was a forecast of future conflict. When a ruler died, men did not always ask only who his eldest son was. They asked which adult claimant had the strongest followers, which dynasty local elites preferred, who could defend the land, and whose rule served their interests. Northumbria's unity was always vulnerable to those questions. Oswine mattered because he was no outsider attempting to seize unfamiliar territory. He was the son of a Deiran king and the recognized ruler of Deira. While he lived, Oswiu could not plausibly claim that all Northumbrians accepted one Bernician master. The crisis that eventually placed Oswiu and Oswine against each other began with the death of Oswald, Oswiu's older brother. Oswald had returned from exile, defeated his enemies, reunited Bernicia and Deira, and become one of the most celebrated Christian kings of early England. His victory at Heavenfield gave him a reputation strengthened by religious devotion and military success. But in 642, he was killed while fighting Penda of Mercia at the battle known as Maserfield. His body was dismembered, his authority vanished, and the fragile order he had maintained began to break apart. Oswiu inherited the Bernician kingship, yet succession in Deira followed a different path. Oswine, son of Osric, emerged as ruler there. The exact process by which he gained the throne is not fully recorded, but his acceptance in Deira shows that local elites did not regard Oswiu's rule over both provinces as automatic. For several years, the two kings existed side by side. That arrangement could be described as partnership, division, or an uneasy pause before conflict, depending on how each man understood it. Oswiu may have regarded himself as the heir to Oswald's wider supremacy, with Oswine occupying a temporary position that would eventually be absorbed. Oswine and his supporters, by contrast, could view Deira as a kingdom entitled to choose its own ruler. Both interpretations could survive while relations remained calm. Neither could survive once each king began to treat the other as an obstacle. The historian Bede, writing decades later, says that their causes of disagreement increased until they raised armies against one another. He does not provide a detailed list of grievances, but silence is important. The struggle was rooted in the structure of Northumbria itself. Two royal houses claimed authority in neighboring regions. Each king commanded noble families whose fortunes depended upon his survival. Each could interpret compromise as a temporary necessity, but each also knew that permanent equality between two rulers was difficult to maintain. The dispute could have involved tribute, military service, local appointments, strategic estates, church influence, or alliances beyond Northumbria. Mercia remained a powerful enemy to the south, and Penda had already killed Oswald. A divided northern kingdom was vulnerable, yet the attempt to end that division could itself produce civil war. To Oswiu, a single ruler may have seemed essential for defense. To Oswine, Bernician domination may have threatened the survival of Deiran independence. Both views made sense within the struggle for power. Only one king, however, would survive the attempt to resolve them. Bede's portrait of Oswine makes the later murder feel especially disturbing. He describes a ruler of impressive appearance, gracious speech, generous habits, and deep Christian humility. Tradition did not preserve Oswine simply as the last obstacle to Oswiu's ambitions. Instead, he emerged as a king who inspired genuine affection. Bede's praise must be read with care, because he was writing a moral history as much as a record of events. He wanted rulers to recognize the virtues expected of Christian kings, yet the strength of the tradition suggests that Oswine's reputation was not invented from nothing. The most famous story about him concerns Bishop Aidan of Lindisfarne. Oswine gave Aidan a valuable horse, suitable for travel and royal service. Aidan later encountered a poor man and gave away the horse with its equipment. When Oswine learned what had happened, he questioned why an expensive royal animal had been given away when a less valuable one could have served the same charitable purpose. Aidan responded by placing the value of a human being above the value of a horse. The lesson is not that Oswine felt no attachment to wealth. It is that he could accept correction without losing dignity. According to Bede, the king removed his sword, fell at the bishop's feet, and asked forgiveness for having questioned the gift. Aidan became deeply troubled and predicted that a ruler of such humility would not live long because the people were not worthy of him. The scene cannot be verified gesture by gesture, but it shows how Oswine's supporters wished him to be remembered. Generous in power, humble under rebuke, and willing to place faith above pride. That reputation strengthened his authority as well as his standing within the church. A beloved ruler could command loyalty more effectively than a feared one. For Oswiu, such popularity was anything but harmless. The very virtues Bede admired made Oswine a more formidable challenger. A ruler loved by his followers could survive one failed campaign and return when conditions changed. Nobles who disliked Bernician authority could rally around him. Churchmen who valued his generosity could strengthen his legitimacy. His bloodline gave him legitimacy. His character made that claim attractive. Oswiu did not confront a weak ceremonial prince. He confronted a ruler whose moral image might survive military defeat. This helps explain why the conflict could not be solved merely by forcing Oswine to leave one battlefield. If Oswine lived, Deira retained an alternative king. He had grown up in a dynasty shaped by violence. His father had been killed, his family had experienced exile, and his brothers had fought to recover power. Oswiu had seen kingdoms gained and lost through battle. He knew that royal mercy could be praised after safety was secured. But hesitation at the wrong moment could destroy a family. A ruler unable to control the southern half of his realm risked losing credibility among allies and enemies alike. Oswiu had to preserve Bernicia while managing rival claims in Deira, maintaining alliances, rewarding warriors, supporting churches, and preparing for further conflict. His authority depended upon appearing capable of protecting followers. Oswiu's marriage to Eanfled made the situation even more complicated. She was the daughter of Edwin, one of Deira's most important kings, and therefore carried powerful dynastic meaning. The marriage joined Bernician and Deiran blood, but it also placed a representative of Deira's royal family inside Oswiu's household. Oswine was her kinsman. When Oswiu moved against Oswine, he confronted more than a competitor for territory. He was acting against a man connected to his wife's family and to the identity she represented. For a time, this family connection may have encouraged restraint. It also meant that any killing would demand explanation and reconciliation. Yet kinship could not remove the basic danger. Because Oswine possessed recognized legitimacy, he could not easily be reduced to a subordinate official. Oswiu might appoint a governor and dismiss him. He could not dismiss a king whose right came from ancestry and regional support. The presence of two courts created two centers of patronage. Nobles, seeking land, honor, or protection, could choose between them. Church leaders might receive gifts from one king and influence from the other. Warriors could calculate which ruler offered the better future. Every disagreement risked becoming a test of loyalty. Oswiu's harshness was therefore connected to insecurity. He may have sought supremacy, but he also lived within a system that punished divided rule. The same conditions that justified Oswine's independent crown made that crown intolerable to Oswiu. One man represented Deira's right to preserve its own ruler. The other represented the argument that Northumbria could survive only under one dominant king. Their conflict was not inevitable because human choices always mattered, but the structure around them made peaceful coexistence increasingly difficult. Once both kings summoned warriors, an argument over authority became an immediate threat of bloodshed. Messengers traveled through estates and settlements calling men to service. Noble households had to decide which ruler deserved obedience. Spears, shields, horses, food, and local knowledge were assembled for a conflict in which Northumbrian warriors might kill men who spoke the same language, worshipped in the same churches, and belonged to families connected by marriage. The forces approached one another near a place Bede calls Wilfar's Hill, not far from Catterick. We cannot reconstruct the exact appearance of the site in 651, but we know what Oswine discovered there. Oswiu had the larger army and more auxiliaries. Oswine judged that battle would be hopeless. A more reckless ruler might have fought simply because retreat threatened royal honor. In heroic culture, kings were expected to stand with their warriors. Yet a king was also responsible for those who followed him. Oswine chose not to throw away their lives in a battle he expected to lose. He dismissed the army and ordered the men to return home. Bede presents this decision without accusing him of cowardice. The action fits the moral portrait of a ruler who valued people above pride. It may also have been a calculated military retreat. Oswine's decision can be read as compassion, strategy, or both. Warriors could be summoned again, alliances could shift, Oswiu's coalition might fracture, and mercy and pressure could draw him elsewhere. Oswine could wait, negotiate, or return when conditions favored him. This possibility is essential to understanding Oswiu's reaction. For Oswine, dispersing the troops may have prevented a massacre. For Oswiu, it may have turned a visible opponent into a hidden danger. An army could be watched. A popular king moving among loyal estates could be more difficult to control. If Oswine reached secure territory, he might present himself as the ruler who had spared Dairen lives while Oswiu threatened civil war. That story could strengthen him. Military superiority had been achieved, but final victory had not. His rival still possessed his title, ancestry, reputation, and potential supporters. The moment when Oswine appeared weakest may therefore have seemed to Oswiu like the only safe moment to act. This does not excuse the killing. It explains why the danger did not disappear when the army went home. In the 7th century, power did not exist only in an army standing on a field. It lived in relationships, memory, and the possibility of another summons. Oswine had lost the field, but he had not ceased to be a king. After dismissing his followers, Oswine did not travel openly to negotiate surrender. He withdrew with Tondhere and sought refuge with Hunwald. This choice suggests that he still feared capture and still believed he needed protection. Hunwald was not selected at random. Oswine considered him a trusted friend. The surviving source does not explain how that trust had been earned. Hunwald may have gained land, rank, gifts, or protection through the Dairen king. Perhaps he had sworn loyalty or belonged to a network tied to Oswine's house. Whatever the foundation, Oswine believed his household was safe enough to conceal a defeated ruler. The rules of hospitality carried moral weight. A host who accepted a guest took responsibility for him, making the betrayal of a man seeking protection especially shameful. Hunwald's decision has therefore become one of the darkest elements of the story, yet his motives remain unknown. Fear of Oswiu's army may have driven him. Harboring Oswine could be treated as rebellion. He may also have concluded that Deira's cause was finished and that loyalty to a fallen king would destroy his household. A reward for information is possible, though no source records one. He may have served Oswiu already, or changed allegiance only after military advantage became unmistakable. Pressure or threats may also have been used, but the evidence is silent. Early medieval nobles lived between ideals of loyalty and practical obligations to survive. This does not make betrayal honorable. The episode shows how violence ordered by rulers often depends on private choices made by those beneath them. Oswiu could desire Oswine's death, but he needed someone to reveal where Oswine was hiding. Hunwald became the link between a royal command and the killing itself. Once the information reached Oswiu's side, Ethelwyn was sent with armed men. Bede identifies him as an official or commander acting for Oswiu. The involvement of a royal officer shows that this was not a spontaneous quarrel between private enemies. It was an action carried out through royal authority. Oswiu did not meet Oswine in single combat. He did not challenge him before witnesses. He sent men to a house where the rival king was concealed with only one companion. Every stage reduced Oswine's ability to resist. The larger army forced his retreat. The dismissal of his warriors removed his defense. Hunwald's betrayal exposed the refuge, and Ethelwyn's arrival completed the plan. When armed men finally surrounded the residence, a contest between kings had become an execution without trial. The exact final scene has been lost. No eyewitness account describes the room, the position of the men, the weapon used, or the expression on Oswine's face. A responsible account should resist inventing details merely because the silence is dramatic. What can be said is enough. Oswine had trusted Hunwald and discovered that trust was false. Tondhere remained with him when escape was no longer realistic. Ethelwyn and his men killed them. The date, August 20th, 651, became part of Oswine's later remembrance. Bede calls the act detestable, placing moral responsibility on Oswiu, even though another man delivered the fatal blow. This distinction between killer and commander is central. Ethelwyn carried out the violence, Hunwald enabled it, and Oswiu's authority made it possible. In a system built on personal kingship, an officer's action carried the authority of the ruler who sent him. Oswiu could not separate himself from the result by claiming that he had not held the weapon. Oswiu may have regarded the killing as the execution of a rebellious rival, since Oswine had already assembled an army against him. If Oswiu considered himself the rightful supreme king of Northumbria, he could interpret Deiran resistance as disobedience. But Bede's account refuses to grant the death the dignity of lawful punishment. He was betrayed while hiding after dismissing his forces. The location of the killing, the manner of discovery, and the absence of open combat made it resemble assassination rather than victory. This is why the murder damaged Oswiu's reputation even in a violent age. Early medieval people did not condemn all killing equally. Death in battle could be honored. Execution could be justified through law or treason. Blood feud could be managed through custom. The secret destruction of a king under a host's protection crossed boundaries that normally gave violence some measure of order. Oswine's death also created a powerful contrast. He had refused to sacrifice his followers in a hopeless fight. Oswiu responded by killing the man who had spared them. The mercy of the victim made the calculation of the victor appear colder. Oswiu gained what he needed. Mos Oswine would never again stand at the head of Deiran warriors. Yet the method ensured that the dead king would enter tradition not as a defeated aggressor, but as an innocent ruler betrayed in helplessness. By ending Oswine's future as a ruler, Oswiu strengthened his victim's moral afterlife. Why was such a drastic order given? The clearest explanation begins with legitimacy. Oswine was dangerous because Deira had accepted him as king. His claim did not depend upon one army alone. He represented Deira's royal tradition. If Oswiu imprisoned him, supporters might attempt rescue. If he exiled him, foreign rulers could use him as a weapon. A living claimant carried possibilities that a dead one did not. If he allowed him to remain in Deira without a crown, every local dispute could become the beginning of restoration. Oswiu knew from his own family's history that exiled princes could wait for years and return with allies. His own family had survived displacement and regained power. Oswine's retreat may therefore have looked less like surrender than the first stage of another campaign. His popularity increased the threat. A harsh or hated king might be ignored after defeat. A generous ruler known for humility could attract sympathy even after defeat. A further motive was the desire to consolidate Northumbria against enemies beyond its borders. Oswiu had military superiority, but Oswine had a story capable of undermining him. The murder removed that possibility at the cost of creating an even stronger story. Penda of Mercia remained alive and powerful. Oswiu could argue that two competing northern kings weakened defense. If Oswine sought Mercian support, or if Mercia encouraged Deiran independence, Bernicia could face attack from the south, while internal rivals threatened from within. There is no surviving proof that Oswine had made such an alliance, so it should not be stated as fact. Yet Oswiu did not need evidence of a completed alliance to fear one. Kings acted upon possible dangers because waiting for certainty could be fatal. Nobles watched how rulers treated rivals. Mercy might win admiration, but it could also be interpreted as inability to finish a conflict. By ordering Oswine's death, Oswiu warned others that retreat would not preserve a competing kingship. The message was brutal and clear: there would not be two equal centers of power. These motives are not mutually exclusive. Oswiu could fear civil war, desire greater authority, resent Oswine's independence, and believe that security required one ruler. Strategy and personal feeling need not have been separate. But no private confession survives. The safest conclusion is an inference Oswiu probably ordered the murder because Oswine was too legitimate, too popular, and too capable of returning to be left alive. The immediate advantage did not erase the moral cost. Oswiu had removed a rival, but he had also killed a man connected to his own household and respected across Deira. The reaction preserved by Bede suggests that the act caused widespread disgust. This is significant because the 7th century was not unfamiliar with violent succession. Kings died in battle, relatives rebelled, dynasties replaced one another, and defeated leaders were often killed. For this particular death to require special atonement, contemporaries or later Northumbrian tradition must have judged its circumstances unusually offensive. Oswine had been separated from his army. He had relied upon hospitality. He was killed by command rather than in open combat. His loyal companion died beside him. Those circumstances made the death difficult to disguise as ordinary warfare. Oswiu also faced a practical problem rooted in the customs of kinship. The family of a slain man could demand vengeance, compensation, or some public act acknowledging the wrong. Oswine's relatives were not distant and powerless. Queen Eanfled, Oswiu's own wife, belonged to the Dairen royal line and was related to the victim. The murder therefore entered Oswiu's marriage in court. He could not treat the dead king's family as a conquered foreign clan without also insulting the queen, whose ancestry helped connect him to Deira. Eanfled stood between the man who had ordered the killing and the family whose blood had been shed. Her role was delicate in public and painful in private, even though no source records her feelings. She had reason to demand a response that protected Oswine's memory and the dignity of her kin. The solution was the establishment of a monastery at Gilling. Land was provided so that religious men could pray for Oswine, the murdered king, and for Oswiu, the king responsible for his death. Tondhere, a relative of both royal families, became associated with the foundation. The monastery founded at Gilling became the answer. It was a structured act of reconciliation. Instead of allowing Oswine's death to generate endless vengeance, the royal household transformed the obligation into prayer, land, and institutional remembrance. The place of killing became connected to repentance. The victim's family received recognition rather than silence. Oswiu accepted, at least publicly, that his soul required intercession. This did not reverse the murder, but it admitted that military success had created spiritual danger. A king could win a kingdom and still fear judgment. At Gilling, Oswiu's triumph was permanently joined to the memory of his sin. Did the foundation express genuine remorse, calculated statecraft, or both? The answer may be both. Modern habits often separate religion from strategy, treating an act as sincere only when it has no practical advantage. That separation does not fit the world of Oswiu. A Christian king could fear for his soul and understand at the same time that public repentance would calm a wounded dynasty. He could regret the manner of Oswine's death without regretting the removal of a rival. He could believe the murder necessary and still accept that necessity did not make it righteous. The prayers at Gilling served several purposes. The prayers served faith, family, and government at the same time. They included Oswiu, declaring that the living king needed mercy. They gave Oswine's relatives a role within the new arrangement. They created a sacred institution where anger might be redirected into ritual rather than rebellion. They also allowed Oswiu to influence the form in which the story survived. A monument sponsored by the victor could present reconciliation as completed, even if resentment remained. Yet the institution did not clear Oswiu's name. The very existence of prayers for his salvation preserved the accusation. Every generation of monks repeating the names of Oswine and Oswiu joined murderer and victim in a single act of remembrance. Gilling became an answer to the crime, and evidence that the crime required an answer. The foundation also reveals the power of Queen Eanfled. She was not merely a silent wife, watching dynastic decisions made by men. Her connection to Deira allowed her to press for a response. By supporting a monastery linked to Oswine's family, she helped to prevent the murder from becoming a simple story of Bernician victory. The dead king remained part of Northumbria's sacred history. The arrangement also helped Oswiu govern people who had loved the murdered king. Conquest alone could force obedience, but stable rule required accommodation. Religious patronage offered a language through which both sides could participate. Bernicia could retain military supremacy, while Deira retained an honored royal martyr. Oswiu did not restore Oswine's throne, but he could permit and even fund Oswine's memory. By funding his victim's memorial, Oswiu helped create the conditions for Oswine to be venerated as holy. The rival he could control in life became untouchable in death. Oswine's death did not instantly solve every problem in Deira. History rarely follows the clean ending imagined by a murder plot. Another royal figure, Hunwald, the son of Oswald and nephew of Oswiu, exercised authority in Deira after Oswine. His presence demonstrates that local identity and dynastic competition survived. Oswiu had removed one king, but the region still required leadership that Dairen elites would accept. Even within the Bernician royal house, relatives could become independent. Othwald later aligned himself with Penda of Mercia against Oswiu, proving exactly why living claimants worried early medieval kings. Later events showed that Oswiu's fear of alliances between Dairen claimants and outside enemies was not baseless, though no such alliance can be proved for Oswine himself. The northern kingdom remained unstable until larger events changed the balance. In 655, Penda invaded with a formidable coalition. Oswiu appeared trapped and, according to tradition, offered treasure that Penda refused. The resulting battle near the River Winwade ended in a dramatic victory for Oswiu and the death of Penda. This success transformed Oswiu's position. The ruler who had once struggled to control Deira became one of the most powerful kings in Britain. For a time, he exercised authority over Mercia and expanded his influence. His later reign included major religious decisions, most famously the Synod of Whitby in 1664, where the Northumbrian court supported the Roman calculation of Easter and related church customs. Oswiu's legacy therefore extended far beyond the murder of Oswine. He was a central ruler in the development of Northumbria and the English Church. That complexity resists any easy division between hero and villain. History often presents a temptation to sort people into heroes and villains. Oswiu could patronize monasteries, support Christianity, defeat a dangerous enemy, strengthen his kingdom, and still bear responsibility for a shameful murder. Faith did not prevent Oswiu from acting brutally, nor did that brutality erase every constructive part of his reign. Oswine, likewise, could be humble and generous while still defending a contested throne with an army. The moral force of his death should not turn him into a figure without ambition. The conflict becomes more meaningful when both men are treated as rulers making choices within a dangerous system. One chose retreat rather than a hopeless battle. The other chose to eliminate the rival before he could return. Memory cast one man as the image of humility. It cast the other as a victor whose success remained shadowed by guilt. Bede's role in shaping the story must be considered because almost everything known about the emotional meaning of the murder comes through his writing. He completed his ecclesiastical history in the early 8th century, roughly 80 years after Oswine's death. He was not present at Gilling, but he lived within the Northumbrian religious world that preserved traditions about both kings. Bede's monastic connections may have given him traditions preserved by communities close to the event. He names places, participants, and a precise date, suggesting access to established memory. At the same time, Bede arranged history to teach Christian lessons. His description of Oswine emphasizes virtues that make the killing morally shocking. The episode with Aidan prepares the reader to see Oswine as a humble ruler whose goodness exposes the sinfulness of violence against him. Oswiu's later atonement fits a pattern in which wrongdoing is acknowledged and addressed through religious action. This moral structure does not make the account false, but it influences emphasis. Bede was less interested in providing a complete diplomatic history of the dispute than in showing what kind of king Oswine was and why his death demanded repentance. He was more interested in the moral character of Oswine and the need for repentance than in reconstructing every negotiation. A modern investigation must read both what Bede says and what he does not say. He tells us that disagreements multiplied, but he does not list them. He says Oswine recognized the weakness of his army, but he does not record negotiations. He identifies Hunwald's betrayal, but not Hunwald's motive. He assigns responsibility to Oswiu, but does not preserve the wording of an order. He tells us about Gilling, but not the exact sequence of Oswiu's emotional response. Those gaps cannot be filled with confidence. Oswine dispersed his smaller army, hid with a trusted noble, was betrayed, and was killed by Oswiu's officer. The later monastery linked the death to repentance and reconciliation. Caution should sharpen the account, not make it disappear. The evidence is strong enough to hold Oswiu responsible. It is not strong enough to reveal his private thoughts. The most honest telling must therefore be firm about the action and modest about the motive. That distinction is essential. Responsibility can be established from public actions, even when private intention remains beyond recovery, and a professional historical account should never disguise uncertainty with invented certainty. The murder also reveals how fragile the boundary was between public warfare and private crime. Because both men had raised armies, their dispute began within the accepted world of royal warfare. Had Oswine fallen in battle, his death might have been judged tragic yet legitimate within the customs of war. Once he dismissed his men, the character of the conflict changed. Oswiu still saw a dangerous claimant, but the method used to remove him depended upon concealment, betrayal, and an armed party entering a place of refuge. The victim's military identity had not vanished, yet his immediate helplessness made the act appear criminal. This tension remains recognizable across history. Rulers often justify violence by describing opponents as continuing threats, even when those opponents are temporarily powerless. The central question becomes whether future danger permits the destruction of a person who cannot presently resist. Oswiu's choice answered yes. Bede's moral judgment answered no. In narrow strategic terms, Oswiu's decision worked. Oswine never returned to the battlefield. No army could gather around him again. His dynasty lost its independent king. In the wider struggle for legitimacy, however, the murder created costs that had to be managed through marriage, compensation, religious patronage, and public memory. The act demonstrates that power is never only the ability to kill, it is also the ability to survive the consequences of killing. Oswiu possessed enough strength to order the death, but not enough to force everyone to call it just. He had to accept a form of repentance because his subjects, his queen, and the church inhabited a moral world he could not simply command out of existence. This limitation upon kingship is easy to overlook. An early medieval ruler did not face modern courts capable of prosecuting him, yet he was not free from all judgment. Reputation influenced loyalty, kinship created obligations, religious authority defined sin, and memory could transform a victim into a saint. The king's body was powerful, but the king's soul was vulnerable. Oswiu might control land and armies, but he could still require prayers. That belief gave the dead Oswine a kind of victory. Oswiu took his kingdom, while Oswine took the morally superior place in the story preserved for later generations. The strongest explanation rests on fear of restoration rather than simple rage. Oswine's independent kingship challenged the project of unifying Northumbria. His ancestry made him legitimate, his reputation made him popular, and his retreat preserved the possibility of another campaign. Oswiu had reason to believe that allowing him to disappear among friendly nobles would prolong conflict. He may also have feared that Deiran resistance would invite Mercian interference at the worst possible moment. By killing Oswine quickly, he prevented negotiations, alliances, and renewed mobilization. The speed of the operation suggests urgency. Oswiu did not wait for a formal settlement because a formal settlement might leave the rival alive. At the same time, the murder cannot be reduced to unavoidable necessity. Oswiu had alternatives, however risky. He could have negotiated terms, demanded hostages, imposed exile, accepted a subordinate kingship, or sought religious mediation. Each option carried danger, but kingship always involved danger. Choosing murder was still a choice. Killing itself suggests that usefulness did not remove guilt. The foundation was not a pardon, and it did not erase the advantage Oswiu gained. It was a public admission that victory had created a debt which power alone could not settle. That tension is what gives the story its lasting power. It does not present a crime committed by someone unable to distinguish right from wrong. It presents a ruler who may have believed that a wrongful act would secure the kingdom, then sought both spiritual and public repair. Oswiu's Christianity did not prevent the act, it shaped the consequences. He could order Oswine's death and then pray for forgiveness. To modern ears, this may sound hypocritical, yet it may also reveal genuine conflict between royal ambition and religious fear. People are capable of regretting actions they still believe benefited them. Oswiu might have mourned the manner of death without wishing Oswine restored to life and power. He could accept responsibility while continuing to benefit from the result. Repentance does not always produce reversal, especially when reversal is impossible. Gilling could not return the crown to Oswine. It could only preserve his name, support his kin, and ask mercy for the living ruler. The monastery was therefore both inadequate and profound. Inadequate because prayer could not undo betrayal. Profound because the victor publicly acknowledged a debt to the man he had destroyed. Oswine's later reputation as a saint and martyr-like king deepened the reversal of memory. During life, he had been the weaker military ruler. After death, weakness became innocence and defeat became spiritual victory. The story of his humility before Aidan gave meaning to his fate. Aidan's sorrowful prediction that such a good king would not live long made the murder seem almost prophetic. Oswine's body could be removed from the contest, but his example entered the church's teaching about royal virtue. He became the king who valued people, listened to correction, and refused to waste an army in hopeless combat. Oswiu became the king whose achievements could not fully escape one command. This contrast is partly the work of moral storytelling, yet it reflects a truth about historical legacy. Victors control institutions for a time, but writers, worshippers, and local communities determine which acts remain attached to their names. In conventional terms, Oswiu achieved far more. He defeated Penda, expanded his influence, and played a major role in Northumbrian religious history. Oswine ruled for only several years and lost the struggle for survival. Nevertheless, when their names appear together, the murder often defines the relationship. Oswine is the beloved victim. Oswiu is the powerful king who needed repentance. That outcome would have been impossible to predict on the night at Gilling. Ethelwyn's men may have thought they were ending a crisis. Hunwald may have thought he was protecting his household under the stronger ruler. Oswiu may have thought he was preventing another rebellion. None of them could control how the death would be narrated. The murder ended Oswine's public voice, but gave later generations a reason to speak in his place. This is one of the central ironies of royal murder. Removing a rival can destroy his immediate power while concentrating sympathy around his memory. A living king can be criticized and opposed. A betrayed dead king can become a symbol purified of ordinary failures. Oswiu won the practical contest, yet surrendered the moral high ground to the man he destroyed. What, then, is the fairest historical verdict? The central facts support a clear conclusion. Oswine and Oswiu ruled as competing kings within a divided Northumbria. Their disagreements became severe enough for both to gather armies. Oswine saw that he was outnumbered, dismissed his men, and withdrew with one companion. He trusted Hunwald, who betrayed his hiding place. Ethelwyn, acting under Oswiu's authority, killed Oswine in Tondhere. Tradition condemned the death as shameful, while the monastery at Gilling became an instrument of prayer, compensation, repentance, and reconciliation. The most likely conclusion is that Oswiu ordered the murder because Oswine remained a dangerous dynastic claimant even after his army dispersed. His royal blood, Deiran support, personal popularity, and ability to renew the struggle made permanent coexistence unacceptable to a king seeking supremacy. It is equally plausible that Oswiu later recognized the sin, the damage to his legitimacy, or both. What remains unknowable is the precise mixture of fear, ambition, anger, strategy, and remorse. No evidence reveals whether he hesitated before issuing the order or how he received news of its completion. Nor can we know whether Hunwald acted for reward, fear, or older allegiance. Oswine's final response is also lost. Those silences deserve to remain. They are not empty spaces that should be covered with invention. They are part of the distance, separating us from the night of the murder. The absence of private detail makes the surviving public actions more important. Oswiu chose elimination over negotiation. Hunwald chose betrayal over protection. Tondhere chose to remain beside his king. Anfled chose remembrance and reconciliation rather than silence. Monks chose to repeat both royal names in prayer. Beatty chose to call the killing detestable. Across those choices, the moral shape of the event emerges even when individual thoughts remain hidden. Return, finally, to the house at Gilling after the armed men had completed their task. The immediate sounds of violence faded. Horses carried the killers away. Oswine's followers, scattered across Deira, would learn that the king, who had sent them home to preserve their lives, had been killed while almost alone. Hunwald remained alive, but his name entered history through the act of betrayal. Tondhere, a man of little rank beside the kings, survived in memory because he refused to abandon Oswine. Queen Anfled had to live beside the ruler whose command had taken the life of her kinsman. Oswiu gained freedom from one rival, yet the ground where the death occurred became associated with prayers for forgiveness. In time, buildings rose, monks gathered, and the language of worship replaced the commands of soldiers. The place did not forget why the prayers were necessary. More than 13 centuries later, the system that produced this conflict has vanished. Bernicia and Deira no longer compete beneath separate kings. The armies, royal halls, and noble households have disappeared into archaeology and memory. But the question created by Oswine's death remains understandable. What should a ruler do when a rival is temporarily helpless but may become dangerous again? Is killing justified by the possibility of future war? Or does the refusal to seek another path transform strategy into murder? Oswiu answered through force. The tradition preserved by Bede answered through condemnation and repentance. Oswine had entered Hunwald's house as a king without an army. He died there because Oswiu believed a king did not need an army at his side to remain a threat. That belief explains the decision, but it does not clear the guilt. The most likely truth is that Oswiu ordered the murder to secure Northumbria and prevent Oswine from returning. The deepest irony is that in destroying Oswine's future as a king, Oswiu secured his moral immortality. Oswiu kept the throne, but Oswine became the ruler associated with humility, loyalty, and an unjust death. At Gilling, victory and guilt were bound together, and the prayers offered for both men carried the final judgment one king had been murdered, and the other, however powerful, still needed mercy.